Right, we are live. Let me pull up on the Facebook too.
Land back. Welcome, everybody. Welcome.
This is the Revolutionary Book Trap with Black Hammer Organization. I'm Chief Ali. With me is Chief Ismat. So we're giving a couple minutes for people to come in the room. Let's share.
Land back. Chief Neoda. I hope I said it correctly. Welcome.
Let's share. Get people in here.
Good morning, Chief Shia.
Good morning. This is the Revolutionary Book Trap, reading Layla Khalid. Good morning, comrades. Let's get in here and share it up. Land back, Bree. Land back, Jamie. Good morning. Christina, I'm so excited. Thank you for joining. Chief Anko, Secretary General. All right, let me share too. Let's get some sharing in here. Share. Let's share for a couple minutes and we will begin reading Layla Khalid.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Land back. Let's share the link in our group chats. Family, friends.
The trap is live. We're reading Layla Khalid. Good morning, everybody. Let's share, get people in here, putting in
This
group
is
chats.
Chief Ismat and Chief Ali.
Land back.
Land back. We're reading chapters 5 and 6 of My People Shall Live by Layla Khalid.
Should we get started?
Yeah.
So do you want to set the ground for chapter 5, Palestine in America?
Yeah, so in this chapter she talks about the hijacking, but we're going to read a little bit about what she was saying about organizing. So I'm going to start at the beginning of the chapter. So this is the book that we are reading, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. So let's talk about Hammer City for a little bit also. Hammer City is also our biggest project. It's going to be a city with no white people, no cops, no coronavirus, and no rent. No one's going to be paying rent. Hammer City is a city that, with the constitution written by native people of the Turtle Island, we believe in the self-determination of all colonized people to their land and our labor and resources. And so let's make sure we donate, and we've already raised $35,000 to build Hammer City. It's going to be in Florida, and we're really excited. I'm really excited about Hammer City. Land back.
And we are with the Black Hammer Organization, an anti-colonial organization with chapters worldwide. So we're trying to get all of our people free, and to this extent, we're studying revolutionary movements from around the world. This is Layla Khalid's book, Palestinian Revolutionary, My People Shall Be Free, chapter 5 and 6. So this is right after the 6-Day War, where Israel conquered a whole bunch of land, and there's a whole bunch of Palestinian refugees, and Layla Khalid is fighting back with the Popular Front.
Okay, I'm going to read starting at the beginning of chapter 5. Okay. The Arab people are frequently accused by their opponents and sometimes by their friends of being too emotional. I, as a Palestinian woman, as a Palestine Arab woman, have something to be legitimately emotional about, and it's the loss of my land and community and the denial of my present and future. I am not going to succumb to emotionalism and allow my feelings to blind my reason and undermine my confidence in the capacity of my people to liberate their land. In spirit of the power of the enemy, I intend to rely on revolutionary ideology and strategy and mass mobilization to achieve our objectives. In my work, I have chosen to be an ally of reason, not passion. My party, the Popular Front, and also analyzes and reasons before acting. We do not embark half how okay,
Haphazardly.
that one, on adventurous and romantic individualistic projects to fulfill individual needs or act out of frustrations and hostilities. As Western scientific psychologists hypothesize, we act collectively in a planned manner, either to neutralize a prospective friend of the enemy or to expose a vital nerve of the enemy, and above all, to dramatize our own plight, to express our resolute determination to alter the new realities that Mr. Mushdayan's armies have created. Generally, we act not with a view to crippling the enemy because we lack the power to do so, but with a view to disseminating revolutionary propaganda, sowing terror in the hearts of the enemy, and mobilizing our masses, making our cause international, rallying the forces of progress on our side, and underscooping our grievance before an unresponsive Zionist-inspired and Zionist-informed Western public opinion. As a comrade has said, we act heroically in a cowardly world to prove that the enemy is not invisible. This is so powerful, such a powerful sentence. We act heroically in a cowardly world to prove that the enemy is not invisible, because there will be a defeat, even if it feels like it's not there. There is no defeat. We act violently in order to blow the wax out of the ears of the deaf Western liberals and to remove the straws that block their vision. We act as revolutionaries to inspire the masses to trigger off the revolutionary upheaval in an era of counter-revolution. Dr. Habash, the Secretary General of Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine, has started our human dilemma and our ethical view, and thus, after 22 years of injustice and inhumane living in camps with nobody caring for us, we feel that we have the very full right to protect our revolution. We have all the right to protect our revolution. Our code of moral is our revolution. What serves our revolution, what helps our revolution, what protects our revolution is right, is very right and honorable, and very noble and very beautiful, because our revolution means justice. And it means having our home back, having our country, which is very just and noble aim. Okay, I'm gonna read the paragraph after too. I do not see how my oppressor could sit in judgment on my responses to his oppressive action against me. He is in no position to render an imperial judgment or to accuse me of air piracy and hijacking when he hijacked my home and hijacked me and my people out of our land. If the enemy defines morality and legality in his own terms and decides to apply his ethical and legal doctrine against me because he has the power as well as means of communication to justify his inhumanity, I am under no moral obligation to listen, let alone obey his dictates. Indeed, I am under the moral obligation to resist and to fight to death the enemy's moral corruption. My deed cannot be evaluated without examining the underlying causes. The revolutionary deed I carried out on August 29, 1969 was an assertion of my spurned humanity, a declaration of humanity of Palestinians. It was an act of protest against the West for its pro-Zionist and therefore anti-Palestinian posture. The list of sins of the West is overwhelming. We can talk about those after, but what I wanted to say, this is like very strong, just very powerful. This is very, very powerful. And reading this was emotional to me because it clearly states her goals, clearly states what the revolution is about, clearly states what she was fighting for, why she was fighting, what it means for her to be a revolutionary. What does that mean? Being a revolutionary, why? What does it mean to her? And I really liked in the second paragraph how when she spoke about mobilizing the masses, about disseminating revolutionary propaganda, about being organized and making the cause international, all of this stuff. And she talked about it as she was talking about herself. and I felt like she was also like she was saying this is what the Popular Front represents, and she was also talking about herself, and so she was talking in the name of the people, in the name of the unity of the Popular Front as an organization, as a revolutionary organization, that she was talking in the name of all of them. Excuse me, that this is what we believe in, this is our unity, this is what we have united on, this is what the revolution means to us. And that felt really powerful to me. Land back.
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a great opening. And so I see this as Layla setting the stage for the discussion of what's to come in this chapter, which is one activity that the Popular Front does, which is hijack a plane. But in here, Layla's setting the stage for what's her mindset, both from anti-colonial revolutionary mindset that she has, and also from her opponents, the colonizers, how they think. So she's contrasting the Western ideas of morality, of laws, of Western liberalism that happen to also dehumanize colonized people like Palestinians, like people around the globe, indigenous people in Turtle Island, in the Americas, in Africa, in Asia. So the idea of colonialism basically is that these people aren't human so that we can exploit them. And so she's writing this right before she hijacks the plane. So this is in between the years of 1967 and 1969, which is right after the war that Israel and colonialism won in 1967, and also after after World War II, which kind of the American colonial camp won, and after, so there's this idea that history is written by the victors. And so we can see in these like past 20 years, from like 45 to 65-ish or wherever we are now, that the colonial powers have had a chance to rewrite what it means to act in this international realm, basically. And so they're saying that Zionism, colonialism is good and just. It's okay that we kick Palestinians off their land and bring in a whole bunch of European Jews in here. This is moral. So what Layla is doing is she's fighting back to say that, no, our humanity is valuable to us, and we're not going to abide by your legal code or your philosophy because it dehumanizes us. So she's setting the stage, and this is kind of the mindset of the Popular Front when they seek to fight back in this way. And this is also the same thing when any colonized people fight back. It's always going to be seen as an attack from the colonizers, and they're going to feel so aggrieved and so hurt that oppressed humans would have the audacity to fight back. But that's what we have to do, because we need to rewrite what it means, and we need to ensure that we can build a world where we all don't live at the expense of another. So this is Layla setting the stage for that. And then, okay, so what else should we say?
Did you want to read about the different, like Germany, France, Switzerland, and those?
Yeah, just say that, like, so after, during this time in the late 60s, all the European powers are supporting Zionism, supporting Israel, supporting colonialism, although they twist it in this way that, oh, we're atoning for anti-Semitism from the Nazis. But basically, there's a little quote here on 55 where it says, Germany, according to Zionism, has atoned for the incarceration of 6 million Jews by the payment of 9 billion marks, the German currency, in reparations to the state of Israel, the haven of a united Zionist Jewry. It has since 1965 almost wholly identified with Israel, especially before and during the June War, the Six-Day War in 1969, when the former Nazi chancellor offered to give Israelis gas masks to protect them from Arab bacteriological warfare. This is in quotes. Israel, for her part, has entertained Joseph Strauss and sold Uzi rifles to Germany. So we can see that there's this idea that Israel stands against Nazism and the persecution that happened in Germany, but it's really a reaction from that. And afterwards, since there's no longer that conflict between Jews in Israel, or Jews in Germany and Israel, now they're working on the same side because they're both colonial powers. So yeah, I would just say that like Germany's on the same side of Israel, France, Switzerland, England, America, like all these anti-Semitic colonizer nations are supporting Israel, not because they love Jews necessarily, but because they love colonialism. And Israel is nothing but a colonial output in the Middle East to keep the Arab colonized people divided and for the looting of resources. And then she also she talks about Nixon supporting this too. He has some quotes, and this is all in the context of the Cold War as well. So they're saying that, oh, the Soviets are trying to, the Soviets are stepping up their anti-Semitic propaganda, concocting a Zionist plot, blah blah blah. So, Israel has won the wars, colonialism has won the wars, but still they feel attacked. And for this reason, all the colonial powers are giving Israel money and weapons and guns and all these big things. So that's kind of setting the stage. And we can see that the Popular Front, with very little resources, not as much heavy artillery or anything like that, they're still trying to fight back in these kind of guerrilla warfare ways.
Land back. So let's give our
we could maybe take some questions now before. So this is setting the stage before the hijacking. We could take some questions, take some donations, and then we can move on to the actual hijacking, which is exciting. So do you want to talk about Hammer City, Chief Ismat?
Yeah, so Hammer City is currently our biggest project. We're building Hammer City for the people, and we're going to have no cops, no police violence. We're going to take care of each other. We've already distributed thousands and thousands of PPE worldwide as Black Hammer organization. And in Hammer City, nobody's going to pay rent. There's no white people. It's a place for us where we feel safe, where we feel we can fight together against those colonial systems. Hammer City is going to be in Florida, and we are raising money to build Hammer City. I'm really excited. I would like to cook in Hammer City and also garden, personally. So let's take maybe a few donations, maybe 1 or 2, 3, maybe, before we continue. How do you feel about that? Yeah. So
Absolutely.
Land back. We're a Black Hammer organization. We're fighting for our land. For all colonized people to come together and put our intellectual powers and also our strength and resources for the fight against colonialism and the products of colonialism, and also the fight for our freedom. So we have somebody. Okay.
Ben Hameen donated $5. Land back. Thank you so much. So excited.
Land back, yes. So,
so we could say that just as we're reading about the Palestinian revolutionaries, there's a lot of Palestinian refugees because colonialism. White power, basically, they came in, they took the land, they forced the people out. So this is the same thing that happened to the indigenous Native Americans on Turtle Island. So right now we're building our first Hammer City in the United States, in Florida, and we're putting it in control of the people who should be the rightful owners of that land. So we have a group called the Land Liberators, which is comprised of indigenous people. So we're getting this land and we're putting Hammer City under their control. So this is an example to all colonized people that when we work together, we can restore our land. So when you're donating money to Hammer City, to Black Hammer for this, you're directly fighting colonialism. We're showing all the people worldwide that we can get our land back. And when we get our land back, we can grow our own food, we can have our own power and protection, and have self-determination over our lives to truly be human and not just be subservient to colonial white people.
Chief Ali, self-determination, I think, is the key word. That's so important, that it's something that we don't have because of colonialism, and it's very difficult to regain that even through small ways. But with Hammer City, I see that being that's really just a key word in all our works in Black Hammer organization, and specifically in Hammer City project.
And we have a bunch of donations. Sia donated 20. Land back. Thank you, Sia. Ina donated 25. Amazing. I donated 15. There's some in the comments. Pamela, I'll donate too. I'm white. Will you still take my money? Absolutely. We will, Pamela. Thank you. We don't consider it donations. We consider it reparations, though, because all the resources that white people have been stolen from colonized people worldwide. But absolutely, if you want to regain your humanity and be on the right side of history, absolutely pay donations. We have our Cash App and GoFundMe. So those are both BuildHammerCity
And Venmo. Yeah, be
and
on the winning
Venmo
side
as
of
well.
history. Be on the winning side.
Land back. Thank you, Pamela.
All right.
All right, should we get into this exciting hijacking, which
Yes.
Black Hammer organization does not support? We do not support terrorism. We're a nonviolent mass organization, but we're studying history. So let's talk about this hijacking.
Okay. Well, one thing before, so Layla Khalid, she had her mission, and she was at the airport in Rome, and she is Rome, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, so while she was in the airport, just waiting for her thing, for her flight, I'm on page 58, when it says all was going smoothly. Or did I skip something that we wanted to talk about?
No, that's fine. You're good.
Okay. It says all was going. Okay, I'm gonna read. Did you want to read, Chief Ali?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All was going smoothly when suddenly the human element threatened our careful planning. She talks about the human element being that she was trained in everything except for like talking to people, interacting with people, and so like she doesn't know if she wants to be too friendly or like too like rude to like people. She doesn't want to be suspicious. So that's the human element. Threatened our careful planning. A few seats away from me was a little girl with a button on her dress cheerfully proclaiming, "Make friends." That message brought me up short, forced me to remind myself as I watched her playing with her little sister that this child had committed no crime against me or my people. I would be cruel to imperil her life by hijacking a plane, the symbolic meaning of which she had no conception, a plane that could explode during our seizure or to be blown up by Israeli anti-craft fire when we entered the Israeli airspace. While these qualms pricked my conscience, the whole history of Palestine and her children came to before my eyes. I saw everything from the first day of my exile. I saw my people homeless, hungry, and barefoot. The twice refugee children of Bagan camp near Amman seemed to stand a humiliated multitude in front of me saying, "We too are children. We are part of the human race." The scene strengthened me enormously. I said to myself, what crime did I and my people perpetrate against anyone to deserve the fate that we have suffered? The answer was none. The operation must be carried out. There can be no doubt or retreat. My children have spoken. Laying back. Chief Ali, do you want to speak on this one?
Yeah, so this one, like, she's in the airport getting ready to basically board the plane, and she's so stressed out, and she sees all these people, which make her start to question her mission. So she sees this girl, she starts feeling this conflict, but then she remembers all the girls and the children of Palestine who were killed and lost their land and humanity basically because of colonialism. So that memory and that recognition strengthens her revolutionary resolve to carry out the mission to ultimately free her people to end colonialism. And this reminded me of a little bit of drama that Black Hammer organization got into when we were a little bit spurious towards like Anne Frank, for example, who's this European white Jewish girl who was killed during the Holocaust. And so there's in like a lot of colonial education, for example, in America, the school systems highlight the Holocaust as the worst thing ever, basically. And so, you know, almost all the children learn about Anne Frank as this example of a child who unjustly lost her life. So what Black Hammer said is that there are not just the Holocaust, there's a multitude of other colonial genocides which we don't recognize, or we're not taught rather, that are extremely horrific as well. So we want to not only learn about the Holocaust, which was white people genociding white European Jews at the time, we want to be aware of our own history, all the Holocausts that happened in Africa, all the unnamed girls that were killed in Turtle Island, all the indigenous girls, all the African girls that we don't even know their names. So I see Layla struggling with the same things here. Like, how much do we prioritize the lives of the colonizers who, these average people may not have done anything wrong to us, but they're part of a nation that has overall exploited and genocided huge swaths of the land. So we need to be steeled in our resolve to not just get bogged down in like the morality of like interpersonal stuff, but recognize that this is a global struggle and that we're trying to free humanity from the parasitism of capitalism so we can build a world where everyone can be free and not have to live based on the exploitation of others. So Layla's struggling with this, and I thought this was an interesting couple of paragraphs as well.
Laying back.
Can we move on to another quote next?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
there's
Bolivia. Oh, you can say.
Oh yeah, the Bolivia one. Yeah, okay. So then she's again like talking to other people in the airport. There's another one. This is on page 58, where it's she's talking to some guy some Italian who's trying to flirt with her or something like that. But because revolutionaries are so cute, so everyone's flirting with Layla at the airport, and she's just like, leave me alone. I'm trying to get ready for my mission. But basically, she's talking to this guy, and she says, where are you going? I countered, trying to change to a less controversial topic. To Athens to see my mother, he says. I haven't seen her in 15 years. I bet she's there already waiting for me at the airport. I was astounded and almost told him, you bloody fool, you better get off this plane because it's not going to Athens. I tried to ignore him and close my ears and keep his voice from penetrating my inner conscience. So I plunged into a nervous reading of my friend Che. This encounter made me stop and think because I understood longing for one's own country. However, I rationalized this plight by making a distinction between his exile, which was voluntary, and mine, which was forced. But these human encounters made me decide to be extra careful not to jeopardize the lives of the passengers unnecessarily. Their welfare, however, did not and could not cripple my operation. The deed had to be carried out. There was no turning back. So what do you think, Ismat?
Laying back. So here, like, I feel like she was really like battling with these people and just thinking about like with the little girl and with this person, and she goes back every time that happens. She goes back to her roots being that, well, I'm fighting for my people. I'm fighting for my freedom. And her roots being also that I was forced to leave my country. I was forced to be in exile. I have my family, my people are all refugees because of this colonial power that kicked us out. And so she goes back to her roots and the reason why she's fighting. And she's fighting for her people. She's fighting for her people, and she's fighting for her freedom and for her country. And so she keeps going back and forth with those things. You see her at the airport kind of battling, but she, and that what makes her also a strong revolutionary is that she, like, think of literally what she said at the beginning of the chapter. Literally at the beginning of the chapter, she was like, yes, I am an emotional person and there's something worth being emotional about, and that's my land being stolen and my people being scattered as refugees. But I'm not gonna let this emotion drive me. So she goes back to reason, what makes sense to her, and that's the strength in being a revolutionary also. That she says at the end, their welfare, however, did not and could not cripple my operation. The deed had to be carried out, and there was no turning back. That's also like very powerful. Just her determination to get it done, because she knew that was what's right.
Exactly, yeah. And just to set, so we have some comments. So despite all the atrocities colonizers commit, colonized people still have our humanity and value their lives. Absolutely. Like, we act, I mean, I always think that we act as revolutionaries because we truly understand humanity and we want to fight for the humanity of all people. And I can see that, like, I think Che talks about revolutionary love. We can see Layla Khalid here having extreme conscience and feeling and love for the people, even though they're not her people. But we know that we need to prioritize fighting against colonialism so that all people can be free. Okay, so setting the stage here. So she's in the airport. She's talking to these colonizers. She's met her fellow comrade. They like given some secret hand signals, so they know who each other's are. So like they're getting on the plane, flying first class, obviously, and then like when the waitresses go and try to serve the food to the captains, they barge in. She like pulls out a grenade, pulls out the pins. Like I know how to fly this plane too, so you're gonna listen to me. And she says that we're the Che Guevara Commando Unit of the PFLP, and she gives her like her pseudonym or her nom de guerre. And so she's directing the crew here with grenade in hand. And what do? So they redirect the plane. Instead of flying it to whatever destination they were, they're saying, no, we're going to fly it back to Palestine. And so there is a quote on page 61. Ismat, did you want to read that one? In seconds, he did so.
Yeah. So, well, before that, it's the last sentence in the paragraph right before that. I thought this was like important. So, so until this moment, the Israeli tower was still addressing us as TWA 840. My patience ran out, and I told him to shut up and turned him off, saying that there will be no further communication until he addresses us as the Popular Front Free Air of Palestine. In seconds, he did so. That was like really, like such a good moment, like because like they were so like afraid or whatever, and like she forced them to like address them correctly, because they had like nobody, like even like over time, like you've seen on the maps, like Palestine is not there anymore. It's literally Israel, and that makes me so angry. But like the way that she forced them to address her correctly. I'm gonna continue reading. In seconds he did so as we swung around my beloved Haifa. The pilot asks, "What shall I do now?" I said, "Let's take a 7-minute tour of the fatherland." My father's image appeared before my eye, and I could hear his voice saying, "When will we return home?" My whole world came together. I was silent. I looked at the greenery and mountains of Palestine. I could see Tel Aviv below. I wept out of affection and longing, and said softly, "Father, we shall return. We shall return. We shall redeem your honor and restore your dignity. We shall become the sovereigns of the land someday." Suddenly, I remembered the mission and proceeded the personal emotions. I instructed the pilot, "Go to Lebanon, where my people live as refugees." The Israeli planes continued to pursue us. At the Lebanese border, they zoomed away. I called Qubros and sent greetings to its heroic anti-imperialist fighters, and sent messages to my people in South Lebanon. The pilot interrupted. We must ask for clearance from Beirut." We don't need to ask for clearance," I said. "This is an Arab country." And I'm gonna continue reading, but just a quick pause. Another thing that also happened like earlier is that before they went to Haifa, and again, like the pilot said, "We need to ask for clearance," and she said, "This is my country. I don't need permission from the Zionist vultures to land." Like, oh my God, like how like can you imagine the joy that she was like, just like saying that, like how powerful it was for her. And also there was another part, I don't know where she says, I lost it. I'll continue reading, and when it comes back I'll say it. Okay, so she said, "This is an Arab country, so we don't need a task for clearance." We circled Beirut briefly before I ordered the pilot to go to Damascus. He objected. The airport there wouldn't accommodate the Boeing 707. That's the plane they're on. "Look, do you think we're so backwards that we couldn't handle your damn plane?" I said strongly. He didn't respond. I took the microphone and addressed the passengers for the last time. "Evacuate immediately upon landing and have a nice holiday in Syria," and all of that. Land back.
She's so snarky, and I love it.
Hold on. I remembered what it was. When she was like, she said something. She was like giving them orders to the pilot and the co-pilot and the whatever the team. She was giving them like orders and stuff when they were in the plane, and she said like there was a part when she said, "I probably sounded angry, but the truth is I was like overwhelmed with joy." Like she wasn't even like she sounded angry or whatever, because this is an operation, it's still like serious, whatever. And she understands the enormous role that she has here, you know, with her operation. But she says like she was like filled with joy, you know, like doing this because she knows it's like this is her role in the revolution. This is what she had to do. So that was like it's just really wonderful the way she talks about it, and like the way she says, you know, I don't need permission to enter my own land. That was very powerful also. Land back.
Got a question. Is Saudi Arabia an imperialist country? Great question from Skeptical Mantis. Is Saudi Arabia an imperialist country? So an imperialist country, what's that? One that uses capitalism on the global scale to extract resources from poor countries worldwide. So, I mean, the way that I see it is that there's kind of one imperialist bloc over the whole world. This is led by the US, the United States as the global superpower, the kind of the biggest colonial imperialist monster worldwide. So it uses colonialism directly to steal the land and get resources, for example, on Turtle Island. It works with the colonial powers in Europe that did the same over Africa and over Asia. So that's why, for example, the United States and Europe, kind of the West has all this money and power and influence. And then so those are the core colonial powers. But then there's a lot of other countries that go alongside with them. You'll have, for example, South Korea, you'll have Saudi Arabia, you'll have Brazil, for example, now, that these are not directly colonial powers themselves, but they want to align themselves with colonialism, with global imperialism. So we consider these countries and these leaders neo-colonial sellouts or submissive neo-colonial sellouts, where they basically want to follow white power, and they'll do whatever the white power countries, the colonialist countries say, so that they can get the nice trade deals, they can get resources. And so they're basically trading, you know, their camaraderie with humanity for a quick buck from the imperialist powers. And Black Hammer maintains as one of our 4 principles of unity that all the problems that colonized people face, whether that be like poverty, racism, sexism, anything, is because of colonialism and the neo-colonial sellouts. So great question.
Land back.
Great question. Yeah, and then just on that quote where Layla was talking about flying over Haifa, it really touched me because this is where her family's from, and she could only see it from something like 10,000 feet up in a plane because of borders and the checkpoints and the walls and basically the powers of colonialism. They prevent the indigenous people of the land from going back and seeing their homes, and to be fully human and to have the right to say that, no, you can't do this. And we can see that Layla is starting to exercise that power and become a full human again, to have control over herself when she's directing the people on the plane. But her entire people, her nation doesn't have that power because they don't have access to their land. The refugees spread out throughout all of the globe. And this also reminds me of indigenous people in the Americas. And for example, like we have in the US, what's called is like, immigrants, people who like illegal immigration of all this stuff from indigenous people from Central and South America, for example. They'll try to come to what land is rightfully theirs, the United States, but what the US does is put them basically in concentration camps, sterilizes them, abuses them, traffics them. And this is the same thing that's happening in Israel and Palestine. So we have to see the importance of getting colonized people their land back. And that's why Black Hammer says, kind of our catchphrase is land back, because we say this all the time, to recognize that we're fighting for all colonized people to get their humanity and their land.
Land back. That's another thing also when she says, Father, we shall return, we shall redeem your honor and restore your dignity, we shall become the sovereigns of this land someday. That's also like goes back to what I just said about like Hammer City. Self-determination. Once I found out the Constitution was written by people of the Turtle Island, like I was really happy, because this just like the way we at Black Hammer structure or do our projects and things like that, it's like it puts the people of the land first. The way like me and Chief Ali are like discussing a book about Palestine, kind of like the same way like that. And so for her, like her saying that we will become sovereign of this land someday, like she is going back to that goal of her being a revolutionary. This is her mission. This is what she's fighting for, is the sovereignty of the land. That's her land. Oops.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Land back.
So she, you know, we start out, she goes to Rome. She and her comrade, they hijack the plane. They fly over Haifa in Palestine, which is now colonized and occupied by Israel. They eventually land in Syria, which is controlled, if you remember from last week's chapters, chapter 3 and 4, controlled by this kind of social democrat liberal government known as like the Ba'ath Party. So the Ba'ath Party are in control in Syria where they land. And then later on in chapter 5, we can see what happens when she lands. And basically she's very like polite. She gives a speech to all the people who are on the plane with her. And then the Syrian people at the airport are actually pretty chill with them. They land the plane, evacuate everyone, and then they go back inside and like explode the cockpit as this act of anti-colonial, like, you know, we're taking these resources back, or if we can't have it, we're not gonna let you have it either. But then what happens is actually the Social Democrat Ba'ath Party, these liberals and neo-colonials in the Syrian government, imprison her and her comrade for a number of months. And she has a really tough time in prison. She eventually goes on a hunger strike. She learns that there were some Zionists on the plane as well, and they were in prison too, but then the Syrians let them free before that Layla, this like Palestinian Arab revolutionary, was let free. And so there's a quote on page 63 that I want to go to. It starts with, "I was not fully conscious." So this is when she's in prison going on a hunger strike, and she says, "I was not fully conscious until the morning of September 2nd. Where is that? Trying to find it. So right there. "I was not fully conscious until the morning of September 2nd, when, with a sense of inner peace and self-fulfillment, I sat down to the hospital and wrote a few notes, taking my inspiration from Che Guevara's immortal dictum, which is, 'We must grow tough, but without ever losing our tenderness.' What a beautiful passage. More beautiful is the tradition of revolutionary tenderness. I'm sure that I have practiced that art effectively. Others will have to pass judgment on my deed. I am certain, though, that the capitalist press regarded my deed as an outrage and urged their governments to prosecute those criminals ruthlessly or to extradite them to other countries where they could be prosecuted. I am somewhere in Damascus. I was placed here after I carried out my mission, after I performed my revolutionary duty against the enemy. It was a momentous second in my life when I put my fingers on the trigger and ordered the enemy, the Zionist pilots, to obey my command. All my life, I dreamt of carrying arms to aim at the enemy, that vengeful enemy who raped our land and has expropriated our homes without compensation. O Palestine, I'm ready to die. I shall live by dying for thee." And I just thought this was a beautiful moment. Again, the fact that Layla is so determined to have revolutionary confidence and also revolutionary love for her people, and that she can really feel that power and that love and her humanity expressed when she has the ability to stand up and say no to the people who are colonizing and exploiting her and her people.
Land back.
So then she's still in prison. Did you have another quote you wanted to read?
Not from chapter 5.
I had just a couple quick ones. Just like one, she's still in prison. She says that, Ho Chi Minh died, and that Vietnamese revolutionary, and his death struck me like lightning. I felt like part of me had died. It was the same feeling when I heard about the assassination of Che. So we see that, again, Layla is relating the Palestinian struggle to the struggles in Cuba, Central and South America, and also Vietnam, that all colonized people are facing the same enemy, which is colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last part in chapter 5 I wanted to read was on page 69. It was right when she was about to be let free. It says, "On October 11th, 1969, Salim, which is her comrade, and I visited the then Syrian Minister of Defense, Hafez al-Assad." So Hafez al-Assad at the time in 1969 was the Minister of Defense. He would later go on to be president, and his son, Bashar al-Assad, is the current president of Syria. So we can see kind of the continuation that even though this Ba'ath Party, they're not like very revolutionary, but they're still a little bit trying to resist colonialism. We can see eventually what happened, which is that the Syrian civil war that's going on right now was inflamed by the imperialist powers, and they make up a whole bunch of lies about the current Syrian government, all in an attempt to kind of weaken and break up the country. And we can see that they were fairly successful at weakening the country. There's like a huge refugee crisis, and that what the United States has done is that they send arms, they send weapons, they send like military training to anyone who wants to fight against any sort of vaguely anti-colonial government. And so right now, the Syrian government, Bashar al-Assad, is still in power, but they haven't regained control of all of their land. The U.S. still has some like military outposts there because there's oil there. Go figure. So yeah, it's just on this quote. She's visiting with Hafez al-Assad. We spent 45 days under house arrest, cut off from the world. I regarded our stay in Damascus as an internment. Al-Assad adhered to the official policy of giving us hospitality. Isn't that nice? When I persisted in calling myself a prisoner of the Syrian Ba'ath Party, the minister apologetically explained that his government was under external pressure either to extradite us or put us on trial. Both alternatives, he said, were highly unpalatable. He expressed grudging admiration for us while insinuating that the operation was the work of Egyptian intelligence against revolutionary Syria. Because there's all this like silly infighting between these like fake revolutionaries, neo-colonials like the Ba'ath Party and Nasser in Egypt. We can see that still, even though they want to resist, they're not really strong enough, that they're listening to whatever the colonizers say, and they feel a little bit envious of a revolutionary like Layla Khalid. So basically, this just shows me if you actually want to overturn colonialism, get with the revolutionary party that is serious about overturning colonialism. Don't just kind of become a neo-colonial sellout in these ways.
Play it back. So we can move on to chapter 6. So I'm on page 70 at the very last very last paragraph. Rogers appealed to the Arabs.
You want to give a little context, like what the UN resolution he's doing is?
Yeah, so they're doing this UN resolution supposedly to bring peace between the Arabs and Israel, and clearly it wasn't for the favor of Arab people or Palestinians, and they there was these different like points that they were talking about, and what they were trying to do is continue the divide, and also continuing the divide means worse conditions for the for like Gaza West Bank. So that's what it meant. But yeah, so I don't know if this is a good but yeah, this is what they wanted to do with this resolution, land back. So Rogers appealed. Did you want to say something, Chief Ali? Okay. Roger appealed to the Arabs to accept permanent peace based on a binding agreement. He urged the Israelis to withdraw from the occupied territory when their territorial integrity is assured, as investigated by Security Council resolution. He saw the major issues as peace, security, and withdrawal of territory. To establish a state. So see, even their frame of work, even in their framework of thinking, they're not even thinking about people native to this land, the indigenous people of this land were kicked out. They're thinking of Israel as legitimate when they're not. Like, even within trying to find peace or whatever, they're not even thinking in our perspective being our land was stolen. Okay. To establish a state of peace, belligerency has to renounce, and conditions and obligations of peace must be specifically defined. Respect for mutual sovereignty and obligation must be specified. Moreover, Rogers insisted that a peace agreement between the parties must be based on stated intentions and a willingness to bring about basic changes in the attitudes and conditions which characterizes the Middle East today. To guarantee the peace further, there should be demilitarized zones and related security arrangements. They don't even want them to be protecting themselves. Worked out between the parties with the help of jarring. Rogers pointed out the need for secure, recognized boundaries and suggested that demarcation lines should not reflect the weight of conquest and should be confined to insubstantial alteration required for mutual security. On the question of refugee, he merely acknowledged the fact of the new consciousness among the young Palestinians whose aspirations and desires need to be channeled away from bitterness, frustration, towards hope and justice. So how are they going to be, like, this doesn't even contradicting. How are they going to do that? Like, how are they going to have hope and want to fight for justice if they're not going to like be bitter about their lost land? Like, this doesn't like make sense at all. And then Jerusalem, he said, should be a unified city with access to all persons, faith, and nationalities. I'm gonna stop here.
That last part, I was like, it used to be a unified city, but wherever could access it, and then it was colonized.
Yes, so listen, this is literally what colonialism does. Colonialism, like, this is like my example of like, my example is like so many things that you see, like those BuzzFeed or whatever, like news sites, like try to say like life hack or whatever, or like this is my example, is like, I'm not gonna say the example, but like this examples of like, for example, this is a good example, like the wildfires. Indigenous people of this land had controlled like fires. I'm not familiar with it, so I can't speak much about it. I saw it in on something, and the wildfire that was actually good for them, but they were banned. Indigenous people were banned from doing it in California, and then the wildfires started, and now they're like, oh wait, there's this solution that we can try. Like, can you imagine that people who have been living on this land for like centuries actually know how to deal with it? Or like so many other things of like this leaf thing in like India, or like this thing about like, there's just different things, and they're like, oh, like, you're the ones who ruined it from the start. You're the ones who ruined it from the start. And suddenly there's all these discoveries, like, oh, actually this, like, we discovered this thing. No, you made people stop doing it. You silenced people and labeled them as backwards, as people who are behind in technology or whatever, just because they do this thing, and you want to make yourself look smart. This is also something that you see with LGBT rights also. Like, who taught us like homophobia and transphobia and those things? And now when you think of LGBT rights, you think of Europe, you think of America. Like, who taught us to hate the sexually deviant or whatever? Who taught us to do that? Like they don't see. This is what colonialism has been doing. They reinforce those systems of patriarchy, of these systems of different things. They make it into the communities to destroy the communities and destroy the communities. And then suddenly they're like, after like all this time, they're like, oh, actually we're progressive, we're so cool, we've discovered, we want to fight for the women, and then women can't have birth control, women can't have abortions. And then when you go overseas or something, you literally have maternal leave, you have paternal leave, you can have an abortion. And then they completely ignore that, and they're like, oh, just women are oppressed or whatever. And it's not saying that women aren't, like, women are struggling everywhere, like, people are struggling everywhere, but who enforced this, or who made this idea, this oriental ideas of things? So this one, I think I went off topic, but yeah, this one makes me kind of mad, really mad actually. Chief Adi, did you have something to say, or did you want to move to the next one?
Yeah, I wanted. That was perfect. Like, the way that people around the world were living peacefully before colonialism happened created all these power dynamics, this exploitation, and that the colonial powers then they go back and they see that they've caused all this trouble, and then they wag their finger and say, oh, no, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And that's used as further kind of ammunition for them to go in and take control. And then you start talking about, for example, women's rights, and we can see that the U.S., for example, is allied with Saudi Arabia, which is extremely sexist, doesn't like until recently didn't even allow women to go out of the home without a male guardian. They weren't allowed to drive until like 2 years ago or something like that, and all this nonsense. So that the U.S. has the audacity to basically like lie and say, oh, we care about women's rights, but then they'll ally with the most regressive parts. We care about human rights, but then they install like military fascist dictators around the world, both in like Jordan, as we'll see soon, like same thing that happened in South Korea and a whole bunch of other places. And it gets back to the pinkwashing you were talking about, where Israel pretends that, oh, we're so liberal because we allow gay people to serve in the colonial military to go oppress and genocide Palestinians. And there's a short quote, we don't have to pull up, but just like from chapter 5, Nixon was talking about, and he says that America supports Israel because we believe in self-determination for nations. We support Israel because we oppose aggression in every form. America supports Israel because it examples a long-range hope for the Middle East. And they have this alternate mindset, which allows them to lie, and they don't see how they're being so hypocritical. And they're the ones who don't care about humanity. They're the ones that don't care about like allowing indigenous nations to have control. They only see it from this colonial mindset, which is why Black Hammer says it's the main issue. Yeah.
How are people like also so brainwashed? Like they really don't see it. It's really hard, and this is like importance of political education. Like get this, understand this, study like your history, study this system that is trying to destroy you. Like trying to study and learn also is very important, because I think a lot of people is brainwashed into thinking that this makes sense to them, and if you try to argue with them, they try to convince you, like with the voting, for example. Yeah, it's really like it's really sad.
Yeah, but then so getting back to this, like we can see the opening quote was they're trying to implement this UN resolution, which was like, oh, please, Israel, go back to the lands you stole before, not the ones you stole in the most recent war, and that will acknowledge your statehood. So it's very weak and very liberal, but still we can see the reaction from the Zionists, where they were so mad even from this thing. And so what they did, they got all of their lobbyists in Washington to go and like harass the US government. And of course, the US government loves the Zionists because they love colonialism. And so then the US government started pushing back against even this very weak UN resolution. And that what the US government then did is they drafted a separate kind of peace agreement between Israel and Jordan, or the Jordanian government, I should say, which was even worse than the UN agreement, because the government in Jordan is, if you remember from last week, it was put in place because of the colonial powers, originally Britain and then sustained by the US. But the monarchy in Jordan does not represent the people. It's very regressive. They're very greedy as well. But this peace agreement between Jordan and Israel basically meant that Jordan would acknowledge Israel, and Israel wouldn't fight back against Jordan, or maybe they'd have some good trade deals or some other nonsense. But in exchange, Jordan would, or the Jordanian government and military would go and fight back against the Palestinian revolutionaries, including Leil Khalid's group, the PFLP. And so the rest of chapter 6, it's this open warfare between the Jordanian monarchy government fighting back against the Palestinian people, their own Arab brothers. They're fighting against the revolutionaries because they want to align themselves with colonialism. And so we can see really how neocolonialism, it puts like basically brother against brother, sister against sister, where both people are colonized people, but because one side wants to fight against colonialism and the other side wants to be submissive and suck up to it, like the colonial powers just get them both to kill each other. And so that's what happens between the Palestinians and the Jordanians in the rest of this chapter. It's very sad.
Land back. There is a quote near the end of the chapter at page 77 that I wanted to go over.
What's the quote say?
In his July 23 speech. It's near the end. It's talking about Gamal Abdel Nasser. In his speech, President Nasser proclaimed Egypt's aim: Israeli withdraw from all occupied Arab territory in recognition of legitimate rights of Palestinian people. We do not want war for war's sake, he said. We want to liberate our land. We want the right of Palestine. We want the rights of Palestine people. We have accepted the American proposal presented by Secretary of State Williams Roger. We do not see anything new in them. We have accepted them in the past. It is Israel who rejects them. Israel drops 1,000 tons of bombs on us, yet when the modern Soviet weapon arrived in Egypt, a full attack was made, and no American newspaper mentioned that Israel had 72 missiles based for defense. What does this mean? What does it mean to have no right to defend ourselves when Israel has such a right to attack us? The crucial implication of Nasser's stance, the destruction of resistance movement as a precondition to peace, was not admitted. Nasser insisted that Egypt had a right to sue for peace and the Palestinians had a right to fight for the liberation of their country. Two contradictory rights. Nasser's decision to accept Roger's proposal had a demoralization effect on the Arab world and a devastating impact on the resistance, notwithstanding Al-Ahram reports to the contrary. Within 2 weeks of the ill-conceived pronouncements, a ceasefire order was issued beginning in August 7, 1970. The expected coexistence between Zionists and Arabs did not materialize. The resistance was the main obstacle. It had to be crushed before the elder statements of Zionist and Arabism marched hand in hand to alter Solomon's temple and Umar's mosque. Joint efforts to contain the resistance were mounted. Funds stopped pouring into Fatah coffers. A worldwide propaganda war against the resistance was declared. The movement of resistance group across frontier was carefully monitored and gravely curtailed in strategic areas within Jordan. Hussein, with Arab silence, therefore, approval, immediately launched his systematic liquidation campaign against honest terroristic revolutionaries with distinction. What I have to say about this is that how once you start negotiating with the UN, with the powers, Great Britain, France, whatever, once you start doing your negotiation with them, then you're doing it wrong, or you're doing something wrong for your people. Why? Well, there was a part here that made me think of the slogan "No Justice, No Peace" with the recent protests. How peace and justice are seen. So so if you want this peace, you're not you we're fighting for justice, and that's why we can't have peace. And this is exactly why Gamal Abdel Nasser, whenever he did his acceptance or whatever, the negotiation, he was saying one thing, because remember how he really like messed up with his status when he allied himself with the colonists. And what I'm trying to say is that he is trying to save face, I guess, and he's continuing to say those things and trying to get the people on his side. So on this hand, he's saying all this thing about liberation of the people and all those things. On the other hand, he's agreeing to this resolution. He's agreeing that doesn't even allow for justice. Doesn't even allow for justice. So this is the crucial implication of Nasser's stance. It's the destruction of resistance movement as a precondition to peace. So if you want to crush the movement, he's saying you can't have peace while this resistance is going on, but you can't have justice without this movement. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, this just made me think of, this is again going back to our third principle of unity, that all our problems come from colonialism and also the neo-colonial sellouts who are trying to gain gain a place in the eyes of Britain, America, whatever. Israel even, trying to gain a place, trying to ally themselves. Like, do you know how powerful Arab people would be because we have oil, and that's what America wants. Even if we want to go ahead and do what they want us to do, or like we could have so much control because we have oil, and like they're literally like begging for oil, right? And there was a period when that happened also, like, but it's difficult to do that when um this system has this system doesn't allow um for the people to determine for themselves what is going to happen. um I hope that makes sense. um yeah.
And
Land
that makes
back.
a lot of sense. Like, even the way that Nasser was talking, he's like, I can't believe that the American newspapers wouldn't talk about when Israel bombed us. It's like this idea that America or any colonizer has, like, even regards you as human. So like, stop with that mindset. Stop wasting your time for that. And that just shows me what these non-revolutionary people who are trying to fight against colonialism, but not actually uniting the masses in this anti-colonial revolutionary way, like, they don't have the tools to be successful. And we see time and time again that the only revolutionary movements that are successful are the ones that have united all the poor and working class people against colonialism. We can see this in Vietnam, we can see it in Cuba, we can see it in Korea, we can see it in like many, many, many other places. But in the Middle East here, we can see that the movement against colonialism was not successful because there was all this infighting, there was all this liberalism. People didn't actually unite the masses in a revolutionary way. And then like the next paragraph after what you were reading, it says, it was hoped that this latest campaign where Jordan is basically attacking the revolutionaries would be the final assault before the reign of peace descended on the Middle East. This idea that like, oh, without like no justice, no peace, they're going about it the other way around. They're saying that without peace, we can't have justice, but that's never going to work. That's why we say no justice first. Like, you get justice first, and then you get peace, and it doesn't work the other way. So the Popular Front waited long enough to let every Arab leader, every friend and foe, show their hand. Some Arab leaders denounced King Hussein of Jordan's policies. Others silently wrung their hands. Most applauded his stand on law and order. Then the front decided to implement its offensive strategy. The resistance as a whole should have taken the offensive, but it didn't. So the resistance as a whole, because remember in the last couple chapters, there's all these different like revolutionary groups. There's the PLO, there's Fatah, there's like the Popular Front. The other groups weren't like scientific socialist revolutionaries like the PFLP. And so while the PFLP, the front, was trying to like take this opportunity to attack back and show to the people like who's actually on their side, the resistance movement as a whole was kind of like waiting it out. They didn't really do anything. So we saw like these neo-colonial sellout leaders start attacking the revolutionaries. The like fake liberal revolutionaries don't do anything, and that just basically means like kind of everything gets weak and everything falls apart. And it's not a great way, but that is the end of the chapter. So we can see Layla's still struggling with the front to unite the masses of people, but all the like other Arab groups and rulers, they're not kind of uniting with them to fight against colonialism.
Land back. So those were two great chapters also. Thank you everybody who is being here. Were there any questions or things that we wanted to discuss also?
We're still also taking donations for Black Hammer Organization and BuildHammerCity, the city for no anti-colonialist city. BuildHammerCity on CashApp and Venmo. Anyone got questions, put those in the chat. We can talk about those. Otherwise, we're going to close it out. So next week, we're reading chapters 7 and 8 of Layla Khaled, My People Shall Live. You can find this PDF online if you Google it, or you can get in contact with us.
Yes, with the PEC committee, with the political education and command committee. You can send an email and we will give you the PDF. Please come join Black Hammer. Sorry not to interrupt you. Come join Black Hammer. If you're not a member, come join the revolution and join the PEC committee for political education.
We study the history so that we can learn from the mistakes and not repeat them. So another question, is Saudi Arabia submissive though? It seems to be a major player in the US and NATO and Israel alliance. Thanks for answering.
I see it as submissive. I think because they're like Chief Ali was just saying, like they're aligning themselves with those major powers, and they're doing all those like treaties and the trading weapons and all of those things, and they're not even caring for the people. They're literally like begging for attention or like begging for a place to be like within those powers that are the US, Israel, Britain, all of those. Um,
Yeah, it reminds
yeah,
me of
this.
like, remember the was it last year where Saudi Arabia probably killed this one journalist like Khashoggi or something? And normally, like if you're a colonizer like allied with them, they're gonna let you do whatever you want. You can like murder, you can genocide. They're not gonna make any fuss about it. But we can see when Saudi Arabia like basically killed someone, all the colonial media made a whole bunch of bad press about them to try to get Saudi Arabia back in line. Because Saudi Arabia has like a bunch of oil, so it knows that it has to keep relations good if it wants to maintain good oil prices and stuff like that. But you know, Saudi Arabia is part of OPEC. Another country that's part of OPEC is Venezuela. Venezuela is not bowing down to the United States and colonial powers, and so we can see what happens to Venezuela. That when they don't align themselves, when they're not submissive, they get attacked, basically, like military attacks. They try to get couped. So we can see that because those kind of things are not happening in Saudi Arabia, that yeah, they are submissive, basically. And like to contrast Saudi Arabia, one country in the Middle East that does have oil and is resisting like colonialism and Zionism is Iran. And we can see what's happening in Iran, that they're getting demonized, they're getting attacked militarily. And so any country that resists colonialism and is not submissive is going to get attacked in these ways.
Line back. Chief, do you know countries who are who ally with Palestine or are struggle in 20? I want to say Cuba and Iran, but I don't know for sure. It's just my guess. I don't know.
Yeah, so I know that some countries that don't recognize Israel, some countries in the Arab League, so we have Algeria, Comoros, Djibouti, Iraq, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, a bunch of other ones. I know also Cuba doesn't recognize Israel, North Korea doesn't recognize Israel, and Venezuela doesn't recognize Israel. So we can see that these like communist anti-colonial countries don't support Zionism because they recognize that Zionism is nothing more. Zionism and the state of Israel are nothing more than colonial outposts. So you can find support in these socialist countries.
Skeptical native. I think that a lot of the US, when they do these things, like the US themselves are like killing people and doing like mass sterilizations in like through ICE and you know the military complex and all of those things. So I think like they're gonna ignore like a lot of things. They're gonna ignore a lot of things because they don't care. It's profit over people. And it's not their priority. The people is not their priority. So they're gonna ignore a lot of things.
Yeah,
I think. Laying back. And oh yeah.
Okay.
No, it's not related, so you can go.
I was just going to say, like, you know, wrapping it up, I guess the questions are winding down. Thank you everyone for tuning into the Revolutionary Book Trap with Black Hammer Organization, reading Layla Khaled. We'll see you next weekend, Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern time.
Lying back.
I'm back.